Hi there, my name is Nick Hopwood. This is a short video about how to increase your citations. I was asked to put this together as part of something I'm doing at UTS, the University of Technology, Sydney, with their graduate research school. And you might come across this through my YouTube channel or through a link on my blog. If you haven't found that, it's nickhop.wordpress.com. This is not going to be the answer to all your problems. There's nothing particularly revolutionary here. But it's my personal reflection on some things to do with citation, and particularly in journal publishing. I'm not going to really talk much about books so much. And then I'll reflect a little bit on the citations that I've been tracking in my own work. So I'm going to mainly show you something from a PowerPoint presentation, and then I'll show you something from the web. So here we go. You can download the PowerPoint slides from my blog as well. From the start. So here we go, increasing citations to your work, and I put an asterisk there from a social science-ish point of view because that's the only field or fields where I have any experience in publishing. The graph there is what I've taken from Google Scholar, showing that my citations are on a reasonably productive track. That by this time, 2014, it looks like I'm going to overtake my citations for 2013. I'm not necessarily saying that's amazing, not at all. In the social sciences it's kind of okay, but at least my citations are on an upward trajectory. So here's what I'm going to be talking about as a process. Firstly, 6 different parts, but it's worth thinking about, well, how is it that your work actually gets cited? What needs to happen in order for your work to be cited? I'm going to take each of these things in turn and then talk about how a positive feedback loop can be created. So the kind of curve that you saw on the graph before can be achieved. So the first thing is you've got to publish. I mean, it sounds stupid, but there's no way you can be cited without publishing. But it's interesting. If I look at my Google Scholar, it includes a lot of papers that I gave in conferences. Google Scholar is very inclusive. Now, in your field, people may ridicule Google Scholar and say it's worthless because it includes so much. And it may, your citations that you really care about may be ones that only things that are in Scopus. I know in engineering some conferences are deemed extremely prestigious and are important. If you publish a paper there, that's going to get cited. So it depends. So no publications equals no citations, but what counts as a publication is something you need to understand in your field. It's worth bearing in mind that you can be cited for something that you write too early. I've said this before in blogs and publications. You can publish too soon. What you publish has your name against it forever until you die and forever after. You cannot unpublish something, although in sciences they do occasionally publish retractions. You cannot unpublish. So you want to be careful about what you publish because you don't want to be cited for the wrong reasons, which I'll come to later. Also, an important thing is, if as far as possible, keep the same name whilst you're publishing. It does confuse algorithms, it does confuse people. If you suddenly change your name halfway through your publishing career, people don't realise they're citing the same person. So, first of all, you've got to publish with a name that's consistent across your publishing career. Secondly, people have to find your work if they're going to cite it. If you publish and nobody finds your work, you are not going to get cited. Now, one way to think about that is through search results. Now, most effective search results don't come through searching through the whole text because that produces too many results and they're not very well discriminated. People will often find what they're looking for through a title, through keywords, and perhaps searching through your abstract, using the online search engines and things like that. Meaning that you want to plant as many routes to finding your work as you can in that title, keyword, and keywords and abstract. What I put there, the accidental discoverer. Many people will find your work who will find your work are not the ones you might be expecting to find it. And you can rule out more people from finding your research by writing a very narrow abstract. So even if you're writing in quite a technical or specialist journal, bear in mind that people who never come across that journal before, never intended to read it, may nonetheless find your abstract. And I'll come to why that's important in terms of managing the accidental discoverer. But you want to feed into your title, keywords, and abstract the widest possible array of routes into your paper. You need to cite yourself as well, if you can. People find your work by having read it in the bibliography of other papers that you've done. They might get the impression that, oh, you're somebody who's done quite a bit. You can point them to other work you've done by including your own citations in your work. It sounds silly, but if you don't do it, other people are doing it and they're going to get ahead of you. So you might as well. Proximity to others. This can be excuse me, you might co-author with a big guru in your field. Now, people will tend to be reading her or his work. Your work is also finding your work as well. That can also be through publishing in a special issue. So you get proximity to other people, and so people find your work by virtue of finding the other issues, the papers in that issue. Or you might be in an edited collection, particularly in the social sciences and humanities. That's important. An edited book, you can put a chapter in there. Proximity to the editors or the other contributors to that book can help people find your work. I put social media there. If you're not promoting actively your work and telling people where you've been published and sending out your digital object index, and you don't have an ORCID ID, and you're not using Twitter or Facebook or a blog or your university website and making it updated, people are not going to be finding your work. You have to work to help people find it. Publishers are doing a lot of that work for you. You can add to that. Again, if you're not doing it, other people are, but not for your benefit. It's important to mention that impact factor is no guarantee that people will find your work if you publish in a higher impact factor journal than a lower impact factor journal. What's much more important, really, is who's reading this stuff that you care about. There's the accidental discoverer. But impact factor is an average number of citations to papers in a journal, and often that will not be a flat line. There'll be some papers that are not cited at all, quite a few that are cited moderately, and a few that are cited heaps. So you really want to be in the few that are cited heaps. Now that's not a guide, impact factor is not a guide to where you're going to get cited heaps, it's just an average. So you need to use other calculations and decisions to think, how am I going to get at that top end of the citation tail in a particular journal? I want to be one of the most cited articles from an issue and from a journal for all time, perhaps. Now, another thing is, how are people going to find your work? Well, they can find the abstract for free pretty much anywhere, but how are they going to find the whole thing? Is it open access and therefore free to everybody? Now, paid is not so much the issue, because the people who are citing your work are likely to be people in universities where some journals at least are subscribed to. But you can't assume that. For example, I might want people in Ghana, a country I used to live in, to cite my work, and the colleagues there don't have the same access to journals that I would benefit from in Australia or that I used to in the United Kingdom. So you might want to think about, are people going to get blocked from reading your work even if they find it? But another thing about using the social media and other things to promote your work is, if people do want to read your work and they are finding themselves behind a paywall, you can send them a copy of it and you encourage that interaction so more people are finding the whole of your work. Now, of course, people might find things. I've found heaps of articles that I've never read. You only need to walk into my office to see a massive pile of articles that I haven't read. Shamefully, it's probably now almost as big as the pile of articles that I have actually read. So how do you entice people in? Well, this is more work that your title and abstract are doing. An interesting title, an abstract that promises something worth reading. I'm thinking about, well, okay, so out of this big pile of things I haven't read, why is this one the most important? More important than 100 or 200 other things that I've wastefully printed off and decided not to read for the past 9 months. Now, I'm ashamed to say this. No, I'm not ashamed, it's just true. Academics have egos, and if I see myself cited in a paper, I'm usually quite intrigued. What's this person saying? So you might want to be thinking about, who are you citing in your paper who's still alive and citing other people and publishing lots so that they might be inclined to cite you? Sounds a bit cynical and devious, but I don't think it's foolish to take that into consideration. Then, of course, as people start reading your work, so you've convinced them through a good title to read your abstract and through an amazing abstract to read onto your whole paper, which is a big thing to have convinced people to do, considering they're all very busy and have 1,000,001 other things to do and lots of other papers to read. And I've written blogs about how you might do that. The second thing is, they not need to get bored and give up halfway through your paper. You actually have to write good stuff. If people are going to cite it, by and large, you're expecting them to have read the whole paper, although I do admit that sometimes people cite only having read the abstract, which only reinforces my point that your abstract has to be really good. But you have to be writing good. Every paragraph has to be keep people's interest and keep their anticipation that you're going to be saying something good. You've already said something worthwhile and you're going to continue to do so. And really crucially, that you deliver on the promise of your article. The worst thing that happens to me is I decide to print something off, I actually bother to take it home with me on the ferry, I sit and read it, and I find that it doesn't deliver what I was asking for. The chances of me citing that are really, really slim. The chances of me bothering even to put more than the odd cursory note in my EndNote library are slim. Those articles are unlikely to get cited. So now we think about, so people have actually read your paper. what about their reading and what their next actions are going to make your work cited. Firstly, they've got to engage with something, an aspect of your work. Now, what makes it engaging and how might they engage? Well, you might say something interesting and I'm assuming novel, but it has to be clear in its novelty. What are you saying that nobody else has said? That's where you get your exclusive rights. People will cite you because they're the only person who can be cited for saying something. Then you're likely to be cited. If you're saying the same thing as other people, the chances are some other better people, more established than you, have already said it. So you want to be having exclusive rights to something. You can get people to engage with controversy. You can deliberately upset people or say something that's really kind of against the grain. And it's interesting about which journals or spaces it's appropriate to do that. But you think about why people cite actually in a paper, which we'll come to in a minute. Controversy is really, really important. A useful framework. So you might offer a conceptual framework. You might have done a lot of theoretical reading, produce a very, very accessible digest of a complex theory and say, here's a way I've made it work. Give people a tool they can use. Herb Marsh, one of the most cited people in education in social science overall, in fact, in terms of living academics, developed a measurement tool, and you can get cited for developing a tool that's validated and then other people use it. So something useful that people can take on. Related to that is the idea of coining a term. You can coin a term, like I've just written a paper about four essential dimensions of workplace learning. Now there's a sort of a deliberate simplicity in that I've tried to say, here's something that people can work with, kind of the idea of an essential dimension. Or lots and lots of, think about how you're citing other people. Often what you might do is be putting in inverted commas a concept or an idea that people have developed. So coining a term is a great way to get yourself cited. Another way is to be flattering. Now you can be flattering to a whole field. Literature reviews are some of the most cited works, certainly in my field. I have a look through the journals I read, as the most read articles. Lit reviews are there, partly because they do a lot of work for other people. So you don't have to go and read a whole field. People can feel they can just look at the literature and get an account. But it also flatters people. It flatters the field and says we're maturing, we've achieved these things, there are some gaps here. But you can also flatter individuals. So if there's somebody who's very prolific and publishing a lot, perhaps promoting a particular concept, and you've taken up that concept, then there's a good chance that they might be then citing you because they're feeling like, I want to show my work is being taken up in all these different fields. So flattery might be a route to being cited. Now, how are people going to actually, when they're writing their papers, choose to cite you? Firstly, you have to have shaped their work in some way. If you're just one of 100 or 1,000 things people have read that made very little impression on them, you're not going to get cited. Okay, even if they might have somewhat engaged with you, you have to have shaped their work in some way. They could have drawn on a term that you're using. They might be using your framework. Of course, they could disagree. Now, lots of people get cited for what they don't do, and there's not much you can do about that. So when I'm writing my lit review, often you'll say, what has been done is this, but this bit's been left out. So you can't really influence what you're cited for not doing. You can try and get into a camp where people are saying, okay, this is what people are doing. Now, if you're doing the same thing as 100 other people, how are you going to be one of the 3 or 4 people that an author might cite as being one of that group? So joining a massive group of people is risky. You want to be really clear about how you're distinct so people have no choice but to cite you if they're going to be covering a particular aspect. Now, of course, it may serve their interests or ego to cite you, and that's what I mentioned about flattery before. That if I've promoted a concept X and you're using concept X in a really interesting way, then it serves my interest to cite your work because I can show that my work is influencing other people's. They have to remember your work or come back to it, so I have to both remember things and or find it in when I do an EndNote search for certain particular keywords. Now, they may not be the keywords that you put on your paper that I've read, but they may be the keywords that I've inserted. So that's, again, the accidental discoverer. I may be citing something for reasons that are quite not what you're expecting. And that seems to be happening when I look at the citations that happen to my work. Ultimately, you've got to remember that there is limited word space in journals and in book chapters and other things, and every reference takes between 50 and 30 words. So, although there are usually a lot of references at the end, it's not an infinite number, and people have to make choices about who they cite. So you've got to win out in that competition if you're going to get cited. And that's why it's important to be really clear about what your novelty is, so you're getting exclusive or near exclusivity about if somebody's going to be mentioning a certain idea or area of work or particular line of inquiry. They almost have no choice but to cite you. If you're one of 10 people they could go for, chances are they're going to go for the other 9 ahead of you. So then, of course, the people who've found your work, chosen to read it, engaged with an aspect, then prioritise citing you, they actually have to get published. There's no point getting read and cited by people who don't also, or read and then written into manuscripts that never get published. You have to engage good people. Okay, it's people who are out there and publishing. They have to think about why you're going to be cited. You don't want to be cited for being rubbish, narrow, or wrong. Now that will boost your Google graph. You could publish a real awful paper that says there is no such thing as cancer or something like that. Now, something so ridiculous might not get cited, but there are lots of citations that kind of go against things or cite people for in critical ways. Now, I would say, don't go all out for maximum citations. Be cited for good reasons. Think about where the people citing you might be publishing. Are they publishing in the obscure journals, or are they going in places where all the people can be found? Again, not changing your name helps build that trajectory and enhance the feedback loop so that you publish something, people find it and read it, they engage with it, they prioritise citing you, they then publish, and they publish it in a place where yet more people see your work because they see it in the text and they see it in the bibliography, and hopefully they see more than one thing cited. As you publish more and more, they see 3 references to Nick Hopwood in the in the bibliography there, thinking, well, this Nick Hopwood guy's amazing, he's published quite a lot. So you want to be nurturing that feedback loop, and that will increase citations to your work. Now, depending on the kind of the temporal structure of your discipline, in some disciplines, new work tends to replace old work, in which case you keep needing to update your ideas. In the social sciences, often that's not the case. I'm equally likely to cite somebody from 2011 as I am perhaps somebody from 2001 or 1995, if what they were saying was really interesting. So you've got to check this feedback loop, see what you're getting cited for, see what you're not getting cited for, and see how that's spiralling your citations out, which is exactly what I'm going to do now, is have a look at my Google Scholar pages and have a reflection on why some of my work seems to be cited more than others. And some of what I've covered here will come up, but some other things as well. So, just to recap, I've covered a little bit about the steps that have to happen when people are going to cite your work. Now, this sounds obvious, and some of you may be going, yeah, why is he saying this? But people often get trapped in just, well, I'll get cited if I publish in a high impact factor journal. That is a false logic. High impact factor guarantees nothing. You've got to be publishing, you've got to be found, you've got to entice readers to read the whole thing. They've then got to engage with an aspect of your work, you've got to win out in the competition for space and word space in their papers, and then people have to be, if you're going to feed the positive feedback loop, people then have to be finding that published work by other people, and so it goes on. So Google Scholar, which as a social scientist is something I like to check quite regularly. You can see here's my profile on the screen. There you go. There's the graph that you saw at the beginning of the slides. Now, my most cited paper is this one, A Practical Iterative Framework for Qualitative Analysis, 119 citations. Firstly, what this title says is, here's something that's easy to use and worthwhile in qualitative data analysis. Now that's done by people in a huge number of disciplines. No surprises, this is my most cited paper. It's from 2009, I think, yeah. So firstly, the title says, here's something you can use. It's practical and iterative. And qualitative data analysis, I'm saying a wide audience, anybody, any field where they've got qualitative data. And I can click here on the 119 and I can see that this is being cited in medical research, in sociological research, in geographical research, all sorts of different fields. What's interesting about the International Journal of Qualitative Methods is its open access. And I'm not sure that that's not been part of this. I think it's quite likely that the open access nature of this has fed its high citations. I have no evidence for that, but my feeling is if had that been perhaps in a journal that was paywall, it may not have been so widely cited. I don't know. That's just a thought on my part. But it's also, International Journal of Qualitative Methods, a reasonably established journal. It's certainly not high-ranked. It's certainly not in the top. There are much higher-ranked journals about qualitative methodology, much more higher in terms of their impact factor, and their listing on Scopus or Scimago or something like that. It's not a massive, it's not under Taylor and Francis or in Scholar One. In fact, nowadays you have to even pay, I think, to submit an article to that journal, if I'm correct, which I hope I am. Apologies if I'm not. So it's not the impact factor. of that journal that got the high citations. I think it was a combination of its accessibility and the title, and of course the fact that there was something useful in the paper, which is a very clear framework, which is 3 questions to ask yourself in analysis. I'm not going to say what they are. If you want to look them up, go and discover it there, but it was something that people have found easy to use and have cited a lot. The next most cited is this book, also from 2009. Now this was written with Mark Rickinson, who's a very well-known name in the area of environmental learning. It's a book that combined 3 studies. It's one of the only books around to really be focused entirely on students or learners in the process of environmental learning, meaning that if people are working, kind of writing on the subject of students and environmental learning, this is an obvious place to go. The title is quite general, we include quite a lot of things in it. It's also available on a chapter by chapter basis, that's why the star is there in the Google Scholar, I think, so that people can download online only parts of the book, which has helped it get cited. The next one here, about doctoral student experience. This was in the first issue of, at the time, kind of a new journal, so it had no kind of prestige or impact or things like that. Again, this is open access. There was something about the title and the content here which is appealing to other people. A lot of those citations, I have to admit, are actually by people who are part of the 2 research teams that came together to produce that paper. So not only have I been citing it quite a bit, but other members of the teams have also been cited it. So it's not my own self-citation, but some of those co-authors have been citing that work, and their colleagues have also been citing it. So that's definitely fueled it there. This one is highly cited, probably only because it's one of my older papers from 2004. But we look here, nearly as much cited is this one, a socio-cultural view of doctoral students' relationships and agency. And in fact, this was in the Routledge top 10 most cited in that journal for a particular year, I think 2011. This one here, I think, is cited because it's got the theoretical view, and a lot of people at the time were exploring the idea of doctoral students' relationships and kind of more beyond supervision. It was in a good journal, Studies in Continuing Education. And I think it's had good visibility. It's easy for people to find. Anybody looking at doctoral students and relationships will at least find this paper. The sociocultural view tells people what they're going to get from it. I'm going to leave it at that. I'm not going to go right down to the bottom and think about why the papers, some of the papers haven't been cited much at all. A lot of that's because they're very new. And as I get down into the lower numbers, in fact, quite a lot of the numbers on Google Scholar are including self-citations. But I think that does kind of reinforce some of the points that I was making earlier on, that there are lots of things that influence why you're cited, but making something that people can use easily, give them a reason to cite you, occupy an interesting and distinctive space, be one of the only people working in a particular area, or a leading person, or give yourself titles that people go, oh yes, if we're in this topic, this is something we're really going to have to cite and acknowledge. And I'm not suggesting that we want to reinforce the kind of automatic genuflex or bowing down in front of gurus or grandmothers or fathers of our disciplines. Far from it, but giving people good reasons to cite your work. But before they can cite it, they have to find it. And before they can find it, you have to have written it, and you have to write something that you want to be cited for and not cited for the wrong reasons. Okay, I hope this has been useful. As always, I'm happy and pleased to receive comments on the blog or on the YouTube channel. Bye-bye.